today. I'm Sadiksha Bhattrai, and I currently work as a research coordinator at Center for the Study of Labor and Mobility at Social Science Paha here in Kathmandu. And I have been working in the field of research, I have been engaged in research on migration since the last 5 years. And today's panel discussion, as you may already know from the title as well, is on between rhetoric and reality, an evidence-based conversation on the state of Nepal's labor migration. In the first session as well, we had migration come up as a very important part of the development narratives of Nepal. And I feel in this panel discussion, we want to delve more into details on different dimensions of migration phenomena in Nepal, and I hope we can cover some of the important topics within the 45 minutes that we have in the beginning for a discussion with our panelists. So to talk about the panel, we will be focusing more on the migration, or particularly the international labor migration from Nepal. We already know migration is very complex, multifaceted. In Nepal, we have internal migration. We have people migrating across the border to India and China for work and study. We have those who are, after the 1980s, an increasing number are also migrating to other countries in the Middle East, in US, in the Europe. But today, our conversation will be more focused on international labor migration to these Middle Eastern countries, Malaysia, as well as to the European countries. Before going into our conversation, I would like to take a moment and request our panelists here, Dr. Amina Mahajan and Dr. Shlesh Shrestha, to take a small moment and introduce themselves. Aminaji, can you start?
Thank you, Sadiksha. Very happy to be here. I'm so happy that this is a dialogue, and I'm so glad to be here to have a dialogue with all of you. I'm Amina Mahajan, and I work as a senior livelihood and migration specialist at ICIMOD, which stands for International Center for Integrated Mountain Development. The migration, it has never remained just a work for me. I'm deeply passionate about human mobility migration. And your field, by training, I'm an agriculture economist. Agriculture sector mein kaam gar raha the, and by accident, I ended up in migration. The conflict time, I was trying to understand how conflict is impacting gender roles. And when I was doing these workshops, everybody was talking about migration, and I had absolutely no idea about it. Then I thought, what is this? Tried to look into it. There is no literature, nothing, blank. And that's when I thought, if I do my PhD, this is a topic that I'm going to do. And ever since, from agriculture, I've shifted more to migration. And as I said, it's not a job. I'm very passionate about anything related to human mobility, migration. That's from my side.
Yeah. Hi all, my name is Shlesh Shrestha. I was previously based in Singapore as assistant professor at the Department of Economics in National University of Singapore. But now I'm temporarily based in Nepal, at least for the next 6 months. My background is economics, in particular labor economics. So I study inefficiencies in labor markets. And part of that is understanding global labor markets in the context of migration and mobility of labor across national boundaries. I'll keep it short so we can start the conversation.
Thank you so much, Aminaji Shleshi. So, talking about migration, recently, or you can say the report that was published in 2022, the World Migration Report, it says like there are 281 million international migrants, and among them almost an estimated 60% are labor migrants. And if you look at the data from Nepal as well, like last fiscal year, more than 700,000 Nepali took labor permit from the government to go abroad for work. And the Nepal census, which was published last year, it shows there were 22 lakhs Nepali abroad at the time of their survey. So this also shows labor migration has become a very important part of in the context of Nepal. So, Shleshi, I have this question, like how does Nepal experience regarding labor migration conforms or fits into this larger global migration trend?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, first of all, like international migration is not a new or recent phenomena, right? I mean, you can look at starting from this mass migration from Europe to the New World, including extreme form of forced migration in the form of slavery, right, in the 1400s and 1500s, as well as the debate surrounding such migration was also equally heated and contentious, right? For example, you can think about the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1982, where basically the US banned all Chinese migration into the US. And more importantly, the economic sort of push and pull factors that drives this human mobility across space hasn't changed also, right? So, and like if you can take an example of slavery itself, like it was purely driven by this need for immense demand of quote unquote low skilled cheap labor to work in sugarcane and cotton plantation. The Chinese migration was driven to work during the expansion of railways to the West, right? So the developed countries have always had the need to import cheap labor to meet their labor needs, but they had previously also faced economic and political cost of assimilating these migrants as well as their families into their society, right? And often leading to conflicts with natives, right? Between migrants and natives. So in that context, they had imposed these barriers for labor mobility in particular, right? Although if you look at empirical evidence, in terms of how much does immigration into a country affects native workers' wages is kind of mixed. And it mostly depends on context, although the rationale for why it would negatively affect native is based on sound economic fundamentals, right? So that has led to this developed country imposing strict barriers, often at huge economic cost to their own GDP as well as global GDP, right? So, there are a lot of back of the envelope estimates of, if you remove instantly all the barriers that exist today without changing anything else in the world, these estimates of how much improvement you'd see in global GDP is immense, from 50% to as much as 150%, right? And those numbers translate into, to contextualize those numbers, it's basically getting rid of all world poverty that exists in the world today, right? So the question is, what has changed, right? What is different today than in the past, where migration was mostly permanent with assimilation, is the nature of migration, right? It's mostly temporary migration that we see today, where workers and individuals from countries like Nepal move to developed countries, right? And part of the reason for that is the shift in the developed countries' government's migration policy itself, where they are relying more and more on temporary migration programs, and often through government-to-government agreements, right? And the restrictions that these temporary programs impose allows these governments to basically reduce their cost of assimilating migrants, because they cannot have long-term assimilation, families don't move with them, but also limit the competition migrants have against the natives, right? So in that context, it's easier for developed country governments to sell these programs to their own natives. And hence, you see this shift in these policies translate into global data in terms of how people are moving across the region, right? Especially out of developing countries. And Nepal is just one of many countries that sort of participates in this phenomena, right? And it is not just that these programs benefit developed countries, but these programs are often today looked as sort of a triple win. It's where basically the migrants, the sending country, as well as the receiving country all benefit, right? And there are some programs that have been rigorously evaluated, including smaller temporary migration programs in New Zealand and few others. And the results show that the returns on investment on these programs far outpaces any investment that has been made in development, right, through aid or through national governments. So what that translates to is you see increasing number of developing country governments facilitating migration as a very strategic sort of development strategy, right? And Nepal is not sort of unique or pioneer in this aspect, right? So if you look at Philippines, the government of Philippines established its overseas migration program like in 1974. So does Bangladesh, has a what's called Bureau of Manpower Employment Training since 1976, right? Specifically designed to help workers migrate as a development plan. Right? And looking forward, the fact that there are huge wage gaps that still exist between different countries, in particular between North and South, as well as this increasing demand for low-skilled service sector workers, right? Partly due to this diverging trend between youth and old age population between developing and developed countries. Also, partly, it's simply a catch-up of labor moving where previously the globalization that existed post-World War II era was globalization except for migration of labor, right? So what you see today is basically labor catching up to how capital have been moving for the last 30, 40 years, right? So viewed from that angle, at least economists and in my field, people do believe that if anything, the demand for low-skilled labor in particular, right, through these temporary work program channels, if anything, is going to rise even further.
Thank you, Slesi. Like you mentioned, this migration is not a one-time phenomenon. It's going to continue as long as there is a global demand for workers or low-skilled workers. And Nepal, and these demands will be fulfilled by a country like Nepal. But if you look at the political rhetoric that surrounds migration in Nepal, you see them describe migration as a failure of state. And migration, if you look, it appears prominently in all the political manifestos as well. Like they are talking about the inability of the government to generate employment within the country. I want to come back to Aminaji about this. Like, what do you think is influencing this current political rhetoric of migration as a failure of state? And what changes have you seen? Like, has there been a change in this political rhetoric if you look back a decade or 15 years back?
Thank you. I think when we are thinking of development, the definition of development itself, in a way it has remained static, and this is where Sles's point comes. You know, if you look at the economic model, त्यो चेन्ज भयो पहिला एकदम कन्ट्री स्पेसिफिक हुन्थ्यो त्यहाँबाट ग्लोबलाइजेसन सबै भयो तर विकास भन्ने बित्तिकै हाम्रो दिमागमा के छ भन्दाखेरि विकास हेज टु बी आफ्नै गाउँमा आफ्नै सहरमा त्यो जियोग्राफिक बाउन्ड्री यस्तो सेटअप छ हाम्रो दिमागमा एन्ड इट्स विथ अल अफ अस सो इट्स नट ओन्ली पोलिटिकल लेभल पोलिसी लेभल पोलिटिकल लेभल इभन जेनरल हाम्रो पब्लिकमा पनि त्यो छ किन भन्दा विकास भनेपछि चाहिँ यही सफिसियन्ट इकोनोमिक एन्ड इम्प्लोइमेन्ट अपर्च्युनिटिज हुनुपर्ने त्यो नभएको कारणले जानु पर्यो बाध्यता भयो भन्ने हिसाबले यो फेलियर अफ द स्टेट टु क्रिएट भन्ने हिसाबले आएको छ तर कन्ट्राडिक्सन छ एक हिसाबले डेभलपमेन्टलाई एकदम जियोग्राफिक बाउन्ड्रीमा डेफिनेसन पनि गर्छौँ तर अलरेडी इन 80s यु हेभ फरेन इम्प्लोइमेन्ट एक्ट त्यो पनि छ साइमल्टेनियसली सो वी हेभ बिन लिभिङ इन दिस डुअल कन्ट्राडिक्सनमा इट्स भेरी इन्ट्रेस्टिङ द्याट अबाउट द डिकेड ब्याक अब जुन डिपार्टमेन्ट फरेन इम्प्लोइमेन्ट जसको म्यान्डेट छ त्यहाँकै जोइन्ट सेक्रेटरीले के भन्नु थियो यो माइग्रेसन त धेरै बस्दैन होला आम्नाजी अर्को 2-3 वर्षको हो हामीले किन यत्रो इन्भेस्ट गरिराख्नु भएको छ द्याट वाज द टेक अनि मलाई अचम्म लाग्यो कि आई सेड डु यु रियली बिलिभ द्याट अनि मैले भने तपाईँले भनेको सही होस् तर मलाई त लाग्दैन भन्दाखेरि अ पर्सन हु इज म्यान्डेटेड टु लुक इन टु फरेन इम्प्लोइमेन्ट एक्चुली डजन्ट थिङ्क द्याट दिस इज एन इस्यु तर इभिडेन्स दिस इज वेयर आई थिङ्क इभिडेन्स बेस्ड कन्भर्सेसन बिकम्स इम्पोर्टेन्ट इभिडेन्स हेर्नुहुन्छ भनेदेखि माइग्रेसन नेपालमा सेन्चुरिज ओल्ड अब मलाई थाहा छैन कहाँबाट त्यो माइन्डसेट सुरु भयो कि होइन 2-3 वर्षसम्म यो बन्द हुन्छ हामी जाँदैनौँ नेपालीहरू जानु पर्दैन भन्ने द्याट इभिडेन्स डज नट सो द्याट त्यस कारण यो विकासको आई थिङ्क इट्स अ लट टु डु विथ द माइन्डसेट द्याट थट प्रोसेस र स्लेसले भन्नुभएको जस्तै ग्लोबलाइजेसन गुड्स एन्ड सर्भिसेस ग्लोबलाइज भयो तर when it comes to labor resources, अहिले पनि यो ग्लोबली तपाईँले हेर्नु भने माइग्रेसन जस्तो डिबेटेड टपिक हार्डली अरू होला कि एन्ड इट इज एभ्रिवेयर यो नेपालमा मात्र होइन सबै ठाउँमा सो आई थिङ्क दिज आर सम अफ द फ्याक्टर्स र अर्को चिज पनि फेरि के छ भने त कहाँ कस्तो काम गरिरहेछ आई हेभ अफन मेट पिपल जसलाई चाहिँ उल्लाग्दो रहेछ कि अब एयरपोर्टमा सफा गर्ने क्लिनिङमा चाहिँ सबै नेपाली रहेछ सो देयर विच इज इफ पिपल डोन्ट गो देयर किन भन्दाखेरि त्यो काम के गरिरहेछ लो स्किल कामसँगको त्यो एम्बारेसमेन्ट द होल कन्सेप्ट कि इट इज वर्क अनि त्यो तर त्यो वर्कको लागि जुन रेस्पेक्ट चाहिने त्यो पनि छैन सो आई थिङ्क द्याट हेज acted another burden हाम्रो दिमागमा to not consider migration as part of development pathway. यो सबै फ्याक्टर्सले गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ we are, I would say we are living in this contradiction. रेमिटेन्स नहुँदाखेरि त देशै नचल्ने रहेछ कोभिडले देखाइहाल्यो तर त्यसलाई रिकग्नाइज गर्न पनि हामी सकिरहेका छैनौँ एन्ड इन दिस आई बिलिभ इज वेयर वी आर लुजिङ आउट यो चिजलाई बरु जे छ रियालिटी रेटोरिक एउटा ठाउँमा छ रियालिटी वाट इज द रियालिटी अबको सेन्ससले देखायो 64% अफ द हाउस होल्ड्स आर डिपेन्डेन्ट लाइक रिसिभिङ रेमिटेन्सेस वान वे अर द अदर हाम्रो रियालिटी यो हो भनेदेखि त विकासको एउटा पाथ यसैलाई मानेर बरु प्रोडक्टिभ युज अफ रेमिटेन्सको कुरा गर्नुहोस् फेरि हाम्रो माइग्रेन्ट सबै नफर्किने होइन है गल्फ मलेसियामा इट्स अ कन्ट्र्याक्चुअल 2-4 वर्ष फर्किन्छ एन्ड माइग्रेसन साइकल नर्मली एन्ड्स बाई द टाइम 40-45 इयर्स हुँदाखेरि सकिन्छ यो भन्दाखेरि केटाकेटी गएर परिपक्व मान्छे फर्किन्छ विथ सम भन्दा त्यसलाई कसरी सेफ बनाउने त्यो आएको रेमिटेन्सको हाउ डु यु मेक बेस्ट युज त्योतर्फ गएको छैन बिकज अफ दिस कन्ट्राडिक्टरी थट प्रोसेस र हाम्रो त्यो म आई कल इट मेन्टल ब्लक जसले चाहिँ हामीलाई एक्सेप्ट गर्नै दिइरहेको छैन कि माइग्रेसन क्यान बी अ पाथ टु डेभलपमेन्ट यो सबै कारणले गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ आई थिङ्क वी स्टिल थिङ्क माइग्रेसन एज अ फेलियर तर देयर आर ग्रेजुअल सिफ्ट्स that I see now over the last 1.5 decades. Even political parties ko pani espaliko manifestation ma safe and orderly migration has started. And also I think it has to do with global change in global dialogue also. SDGs ko time ma I remember it was such a struggle to get migration included in SDGs. Goal नभए पनि एटलिस्ट केही टार्गेट त आयो नि एन्ड इट वाज अ ह्युज स्ट्रगल तर त्यो भएपछि द्याट पेभ द्याट पाथवे फर सेफ अर्डरली माइग्रेसन भनेर एन्ड आई थिङ्क द्याट अल्सो हेल्प द गभर्मेन्ट एन्ड यु नो पोलिसी मेकर्स टु स्टार्ट थिङ्किङ एन्ड विच आई बिलिभ इज अ पोजिटिभ पाथवे एन्ड अर्को चाहिँ के भन्छ अब यति आज मिडियाको पनि कुरा भयो माइग्रेसनसँग फेलियर यति धेरै प्रचार हुन्छ कि त्यसले गर्दाखेरि पनि इज द्याट रियली पाथवे टु डेभलपमेन्ट भन्ने प्रश्नको सायद त्यहाँबाट पनि आइरहेको जस्तो लाग्छ बट माई थट्स एन्ड दिस इज वेयर आई लभ दिस डायलग इज द्याट वी हेभ टु स्टार्ट रिकग्नाइजिङ दिस रियालिटी र रियालिटी जे छ त्यसमा बरु कसरी गर्न सकिन्छ विकासको लागि क्याटलिस्टको रूपमा यसलाई कसरी गर्न सकिन्छ त्योतर्फ डायलग जाँदाखेरि चाहिँ आई थिङ्क इट विल बी मोर कन्स्ट्रक्टिभ एन्ड अल्सो टु रिड्युस दिस कम्पल्सन टु माइग्रेट त्यसमा चाहिँ हामीले ध्यान दिनुपर्छ मान्छेलाई इकोनोमिक या अरू कारणले चाहिँ त्यो कम्पल्सन निकाल्न सक्यो भने वी हेभ डन आवर जब थ्याङ्क यू
Thank you. Like Amina ji said, like if you look at the policies as well, we have the Foreign Employment Act and also different migration policies as well. In recent time, do you think, how do you think the policies has like shifted in terms of migration in Nepal? Like how is the government looking at migration?
Is this for me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I mean, just a caveat, I'm not the expert in Nepal migration. So many of you here might know more than I do, so I welcome your input as well. But what I can say is, like I was mentioning, Nepal is not unique in this environment. It's basically trying to follow the template that was set by other countries that have come before them, right? So that makes some of the challenges easier as well, but on the other hand, there are certain unique aspects of Nepal that needs to be incorporated in the policy as well. Besides the political side, what I do see, Ministry of Labor, including the foreign, I guess now it's
Department of Foreign Employment.
No, Foreign Employment Board.
Yeah.
It used to be Foreign Employment Promotion Board.
Yeah.
Hence the politics in that. They are basically they have 3 areas that they tend to focus on, as with any other countries, which is policies targeted pre-migration, policies during migration and policies for returnee migrants as well, right? Because most of the migrant workers are coming back to Nepal because of the nature of the contract under which they migrate. So in terms of pre-migration, obviously you hear a lot about regularization of manpower agencies, price quotas on how much they can charge and all that as well. But also part of that policy package includes orientation for migrant workers in terms of informing them about their rights in their countries, as well as some of the work you and your organization have been also doing with Mushrik and all in Western Nepal, where you try to sort of connect aspirant migrants to people who are already abroad, because most of the migration happens through networks. And research everywhere over the world shows that networks do matter in terms of the quality of migration and how much you earn. So, and these are the aspects that the government of Nepal is actively engaging, right? Including signing a lot of government-to-government agreements. And that's like a horse race as well, because each country wants to sign agreements with different countries. So Nepal is basically competing with countries like Bangladesh, Philippines, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, India, Pakistan, to get these contracts, right? So think about where I was based at, like Singapore, has a huge migrant population, including a lot of low-skilled migrants, but not a single one is Nepali, partly because Nepal could not get access to that labor market, whereas India, Bangladesh managed to get government-to-government agreement with Singapore, right? So that's where I think a lot of government effort goes, and again, this is not different from any other government. In terms of during migration, there's a lot of policies in terms of selling health insurance, making permitting and renewal of permit easier, facilitating issues when they occur in the labor market abroad, thinking about formalizing remittance and making sure remittance is easily transferable to households back home, right? Which also has government incentive because they can tax easily as well. In terms of returnees, however, not just Nepal, but I think everywhere else, governments have struggled to think about what are the policies that sort of allows migrants to seamlessly reintegrate. Because think about it, like typical migrant often only goes abroad for 2 to 4 years. So coming back, they have a lot of productive labor market sort of lifetime they're going to spend in Nepal, right? So we stress a lot about brain drain and loss of labor abroad, but we are only losing for a few years. In fact, they actually come back and have the potential to spend most of their productive labor life in Nepal, right? And then the question is, how well can the labor market in Nepal observe them back, right? And what's the role of the government to facilitate that? Especially with something like NSTB is doing, where they are providing subsidized accreditation programs, certificates basically, which is saying, look, I went abroad, I know how to run a digger, I don't have the capacity to go through training and get the permit, but you can go to an NSTB board and they sort of accredit your skills, saying, you are a migrant, you sort of have this experience. So the domestic employers can validate that because it has a government seal, and therefore are more willing to hire workers, right? So there are policies that the governments around the world, including Nepal, are working on. And again, if I missed something or there's major ones that I missed, please feel free to jump in.
Yes. Slesi mentioned, you mentioned like the government is signing a lot of new agreements with different destination country, and this also has been if you look at the 15th Development Plan and also the ministry's strategies, you can see that they want to find this newer destination for Nepali migrant workers, and which is also different from the political rhetoric that is ongoing in Nepal right now as well. And to supplement this kind of like changes in the policy direction, we can also see from data that Nepali are also going to a lot of newer destinations. Like if you look in the past, most of our migration, or at least international level migration, occurred to the GCC countries, that the Gulf countries, and also to Malaysia. But recently, and even the Nepal level migration report showed that an increasing number of Nepalis are migrating to European countries, and Portugal, Malta, Romania, Cyprus, and Croatia are emerging as a very important destination for Nepali migrant workers. Aminaji, what do you think brought this change in the trend of migration in Nepal?
In my opinion, major would be exposure. And probably I won't be wrong when I say Nepalma धेरै सो चिज पहिला मान्छे they find it autonomously and त्यसपछि government catches up. अब जब people started to migrate to Gulf countries, Malaysia and others, so obviously they have come in contact with migrants from other countries, and that's how that network has actually built over a period of time. And this, I think, is where it started, this expansion, because I had spoke with few people who were working in Dubai and were thinking of going to the other destination because they have managed to get that networks. Migration ma एकदमै important parts in network को हुन्छ. किन भन्दा यो migration जति formalized channel बाट हुन्छ, formalized channel भए तापनि network ले एकदमै important role खेल्छ. And त्यसैले यो migration scholarship मा network is probably the most important part. Having said that, अर्को एउटा फ्याक्टर के भयो भन्दाखेरि एउटा त नेचुरल ग्रेजुएसन पनि हो. अब हाम्रै पनि अब तपाईको रेमिटेन्स युज हेर्नुहुन्छ भने one of the most prioritized sector of remittance use is education. म गएको छु भनेदेखि मेरो प्रायोरिटी के हुन्छ, मेरो बच्चाहरू पढोस्. मेरो बच्चा अब +2 हरू पढ्न थाल्यो भने नाउ आई हेभ अ नेटवर्क, आई हेभ एक्सपोज्ड, मैले हेरेको छु अलिकति दुनियाँ देखेँ, मेरो बच्चाले अलि पढेछ. नाउ आई स्टार्ट टु थिङ्क कि म अब गल्फमै किन पठाउने, what could be other destination, र अलिकति पढे लेखे पनि भएपछि चाहिँ ओके नाउ आइम रेडी फर अनदर डेस्टिनेसन. त्यसरी यो लेबर माइग्रेसनमा चाहिँ त्यो ग्रेजुएसन सिफ्ट बिस्तारी चाहिँ भएकै छ. गभर्मेन्टको तर्फबाट पनि अब तपाईँ मिडियामा हेर्नुहुन्छ नि, इट्स माइग्रेसन इज अलवेज यु आर टकिङ अबाउट टु नेसन्स. ट्रान्सनेसनल इस्यु हुने बित्तिकै तपाईँको प्रोटेक्सनदेखि लिएर हरेक चिजमा अ लट अफ च्यालेन्जेस, र गल्फ कन्ट्रिजमा दिस च्यालेन्जेस हेभ पर्सिस्टेड डेस्पाइट many efforts. Efforts in नभएको चाहिँ भन्दैन, there has been efforts, but it has been very difficult. र त्यो प्रोसेसमा चाहिँ as part of a person who has been working in this sector for quite some time, एउटा हाम्रो सोच पनि थियो what could be other safer and more lucrative destinations. भन्दाखेरि त्यो सर्चमा पनि यो this started to expand. And then I think the third point, कतार जाँदाखेरि it was very interesting. कतारमा बसेर माइग्रेन्ट्सहरूसँग कुरा गरेँ. अरू देशको माइग्रेन्ट्सको प्रब्लम चाहिँ डिपोर्टेसन, नेपाली माइग्रेन्ट्सको प्रब्लम चाहिँ हाम्रोमा पहिला म जुन प्रोजेक्टमा काम गर्छु उहाँहरूको एउटै रिक्वेस्ट हुन्थ्यो कि 2 वर्षको लागि भनेर आएको 3 वर्ष भइसक्यो फिर्तै जान दिँदैन, जसरी भए पनि ल हेल्प गर्नु पऱ्यो टु रिटर्न होम भन्थ्यो कि. किन भन्दाखेरि नेपाली माइग्रेन्ट्स हेभ अनस्किल एउटा आफ्नो पाटो थियो भनेदेखि भेरी हार्ड वर्किङ एन्ड लोयल अनि एकदमै काममा फोकस्ड भन्ने एउटा रेपुटेसन बनेको रहेछ कि. त्यसले गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ एम्प्लोइजहरूले भर्सक एकपटक ल्याएपछि नजाओस्. आई डोन्ट नो द फिगर्स नाउ, त्यो बेलासम्म चाहिँ हामीले हेर्दाखेरि दिस वाज लाइक अबाउट अ डिकेड ब्याक जति डिमान्ड थियो डिमान्डको अराउन्ड 60 to 70% मात्रै हामीले फुलफिल गर्न सक्थ्यौँ रहेछ इन टर्म्स अफ लेबर डिमान्ड मिट गर्दाखेरि. सो डेस्टिनेसन कन्ट्रिजमा चाहिँ इट वाज लाइक नजाओस् यहीँ बसोस् भन्ने नै मेजर प्रब्लम थियो. र त्यो रेपुटेसन अफ हार्ड वर्क, very focused, dedicated people, I think that has also helped to expand that market. अहिले चाहिँ it's not only low skilled, even middle skilled को पनि अहिले demand सुरु भएको छ. And one of the things I think COVID probably, अब यो latest with UK यो नर्सहरूको त it has to do because post COVID it was so apparent that some of these countries have this labor shortage. यति apparent भयो कि I think that has also helped. So a combination of factors had actually helped to expand the labor market. And it's not that old. You last 5-8 years now. And as I said, it started autonomously, people doing on their own, people going on their own, and later now more bilateral agreements are suru huna thaleko cha.
So you say, then what do you think will be the implications of moving more from GCC countries to Europe, like this new corridor of migration that's emerging right now?
You want an honest answer? I have no idea. किन भन्दाखेरि दिस मेक्स मी म चाहिँ एकदम सोच्छु कि किन भन्दा गल्फ कन्ट्रिजमा मान्छे जान्छन् बाई 40 म्याक्स 45 दे आर ब्याक अनि हरेक माइग्रेन्टको एउटै सोच हुन्थ्यो कि कसरी चाहिँ आई क्यान सेन्ड म्याक्सिमम मनी ब्याक होम यो दिस वेयर भेरी क्लियर अब यो नयाँ डेस्टिनेसन्सहरूमा वाट वुड बी द कन्सिक्वेन्सेस विल इट रिमेन यो सर्कुलर सर्टेन पिरियड पछि कन्ट्र्याक्चुअल एन्ड कम ब्याक will that happen or does it lead to more permanent shifts and if it leads to the student migration ma and after student many people are remaining behind त्यो track हेर्ने हो भनेदेखि चाहिँ after certain time remittance पठाउने सोचै हुँदैन अझ उल्टा उतै सेटल हुनु पर्यो they need more money so यहाँबाट पनि लाने त्यो भएको कारणले गर्दाखेरि I think these are newer areas and we really need to understand what kind of implication this will have. किनभने नेपाल सानै छ 10-20 हजारै नर्स भए पनि we will run out of nurses very quickly. So what happens to our own labor force demand ko? So there are a couple of things I don't think that I really don't know, to be honest. And I think we need to have better understanding and better thoughts on this. Celeste, maybe you have more idea on this. Or at least from other countries. You are a professor.
I don't think that means much. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense what's happening, right? And you mentioned that the government policy here is catching up to what's happening in reality. But it is also true from the other side. Like policies of many of these EU countries are also catching up to reality. So you might see those destinations today as providing some kind of opportunity for long-term assimilation. But it is, if you look at data, like very recently, the number of temporary migrants that have entered OECD country together outnumbers any permanent migration they have taken in, right? From any category, not just employment category. So I don't know how much this expectation that, that kind of migration that exists today to European countries is going to be different from what we see in GCC and Malaysia. I don't know how much is that going to come true, right? And this is just my personal view and base, I think those countries would eventually catch up into what's happening and hence bring out policies that are more protective of native workers, but at the same time, allow a lot more migration into those countries. So I see the volume of migration to these countries definitely increasing. At the same time, the increase in restrictions on labor market opportunities as well as social mobility or long-term assimilation in these countries. But I mean, we were saying before, in terms of the general idea of migration, we have to accept the fact that this is a globalized world and the global phenomena. It is also true that the reason this has happened, this trend, is the ability of developed countries to restrict competition between natives and migrants, right? And there is a camp in policy where they advocate for a right-based approach, whereas, even countries like Scandinavian countries, they want migrants to have same exposure as natives. But if you look at data, their policy does not allow them to take that many migrants anyway, because it's not politically viable domestically to take in migrants without restricting their competition with natives, right? So there are a lot of papers that does these back-of-the-envelope calculation, and as much as GCC, I'm not the, holding banner for Malaysia and GCC type migration. Obviously, it has a lot of issues, and there are studies that shows these restrictions actually depresses migrant wages as well, in addition to these extreme examples of exploitation and all that. But GCC and Malaysia type migration contributes a lot more to bringing equity in the global market than policies that, in one hand, gives more access to migrants in terms of less competition, less restriction, but also limits the number of migrants that can enter, right? So again, I'm sort of diverting here, but we should be careful about how we think about that destination relative to today, especially comparing the nature of that migration today versus what it's going to be in the future.
I think just to add on to it, I think in the short run, what is going to happen is remittances probably would be higher. And if, Celeste, what you are implying to if people come back, that would be wonderful. So we will have not only skill, but world-class nurses and other skill sources coming up. And as I said, त्यसलाई राम्ररी use गर्ने हो भने that can actually be used as a catalyst, maybe to develop a better education systems here. When I say not only schools or university, the whole ecosystem of education and hospitality in other sectors. So I think this is why I think it's important now to start thinking, what does it mean? Because if that brainstorm happens, migration ko एउटा problem के छ भन्दाखेरि by the time migration happens, by the time the implications देख्दाखेरि action becomes too late. कि त्यो anticipate गरेर अहिले गर्न सकेन भन्दाखेरि गाउँ खाली भएछ अब गाउँलाई खाली त भइसक्यो अब कसरी फिर्ता ल्याउने जस्तै देश खाली भयो अब देश कसरी फिर्ता ल्याउने भने जस्तै त्यो समस्या हुन्छ एन्टिसिपेसन गर्न चाहिँ एकदमै जरुरी हुन्छ एन्ड दिस इज वेयर आई थिंक मोर वर्क निड्स टु बी डन
हजुर तपाईले अहिले भन्नुभएकै कुरामा जस्तै गाउँ खाली भयो भनेर अघि पनि तपाईले भन्नुभयो अब नर्स 15,000 नर्स गयो भने त नेपालले त्यो नर्स गुमाइराख्नु भएको छ सो नट ओन्ली लाइक फ्युचरमा अहिले पनि आई थिंक इट्स वान अफ द issues that has not been talked about a lot. हाम्रो रिसर्चहरू हेर्दाखेरि अहिले यो फेमिनाइजेसन अफ एग्रिकल्चर भन्ने कुराहरू लिट्रेचरमा धेरै आइरहेको छ लेबर सर्टेजको कुरा आउँछ हाम्रो न्युजहरूमा पनि तपाईँहरूले हेर्नुभयो भने चाहिँ तपाईँको बारीहरू चाहिँ त्यत्तिकै खेती नगरी बाँझो छोडेको कुराहरू आइरहेको छ हाम्रो घरमा चाहिँ बिकज अफ सर्टेज अफ मेन फिमेलहरूको वर्कलोड बढ्नेदेखि लिएर त्यस्तो कुरा पनि देखिन्छ अनि अर्कोतिर चाहिँ अब रेमिटेन्सको कुरा पनि आएको छ त्यसले गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ अब हाम्रो इकोनोमीमा पनि त्यसले ठुलो महत्त्वपूर्ण भूमिका खेलेको कुरा पनि हामीलाई थाहा छ तर फेरि यतापट्टि आउँदाखेरि चाहिँ तपाईँको जस्तै पपुलेसन डाइनामिक्सको तपाईँको सोसल डेमोग्राफीको कुरा गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ यो अहिले जुन हाम्रो नेपालमा भइरहेको छ विगत लाइक पार्टिकुलरली लास्ट 2 डिकेड्समा जुन एक्सपोनेन्सियल ग्रोथ भयो मेन माइग्रेसन पार्टिकुलर मेन माइग्रेसनले गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ हाम्रो यो पपुलेसन डाइनामिक्स र सोसल डेमोग्राफीमा कस्तो इम्प्लिकेसन्स भइरहेको छ अमिनाजी
यो देयर इज लिटरली डिभोर्स बिट्विन माइग्रेसन एन्ड डेभलपमेन्ट हामी डेभलपमेन्ट प्लानमा हेर्छौँ भने माइग्रेसन चाहिँ ब्याकग्राउन्डमा जाँदो रहेछ कि सो वी नो दिस इज ह्यापनिङ बट देन वेन वी आर प्लानिङ अ प्रोजेक्ट र वेन आई से वी मैले गभर्मेन्ट मात्र भन्नु खोजेन अल अफ अस हामी प्रोजेक्ट केही बनायौँ योजना नीतिको कुरा गऱ्यौँ भने माइग्रेसन छ हामी सबैलाई थाहा छ त्यो चिज हामी भन्छौँ पनि तर त्यसको के इम्प्लिकेसन्स छ त्यसलाई चाहिँ बुझ्दैनौँ रहेछ कि अनि जसले गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ यो हाम्रो एजम्सन चाहिँ पपुलेसन रिमेन्स एज इट इज भन्ने किसिमले गइरहेको देख्छु अब मैले पिएचडी सकेको 2010 and that's when I had flagged up about left behind women. Is it good for, women's empowerment or not? भन्ने कुरामा खासै त्यसमा खासै needle shift भएको पनि देख्दिनँ कि म and this is where I think we are not able to use migration to the extent किनभने अहिले एभिडेन्स हेर्नु हो भने कति पर्सेन्ट चाहिँ यो हाम्रो नेसनल लेभल पवर्टी रिडक्सनमा माइग्रेसनको रेमिटेन्सेसको कन्ट्रिब्युसन छ भनेर इस्टाब्लिस भइसकेको छ not because we have been able to actually catalyze migration for poverty reduction. Again, autonomous reason may you because of the way people have been spending their remittances. You know that divorce that is, I think, really doing a lot of harm as a country. अब पालिकातिर यसो गर्दाखेरि तपाईको पालिकाबाट कतिको माइग्रेसन एकदम यो इस्यु आउँछ अनि तपाईले यसलाई कसरी एड्रेस गर्न गरिराख्नु भएको छ भने हामीले यस्तो यस्तो कार्यक्रम ल्याइरहेछौँ जसले गर्दा मान्छे विदेश जान नपरोस् यसलाई मैले सोच्दै अब जो त गइरहेछ यो तपाईले बन्द गर्नु पनि सक्नु भएको छैन डिकेड्सदेखि भइरहेछ डज द्याट नट मेक सेन्स टु स्टार्ट थिङ्किङ कि ल मान्छेहरू गइरहेछन् बिकज एट द मोमेन्ट वी कान्ट गिभ द्याट इक्विभ्यालेन्ट इकोनोमिक या इम्प्लोइमेन्ट अपर्च्युनिटी सक्दैनौँ बरु त्योभन्दा त्यहाँबाट जुन रेमिटेन्स आइरहेछ यसलाई बरु विकासमा कसरी गर्न सक्छ पालिकाले अब मैले पालिकाको अहिले इक्जाम्पल दिएँ अगाडि अर्को स्ट्रक्चर थियो नो बिकज वी हेभ बिन सो फोकस्ड अन स्टपिङ माइग्रेसन म भन्छु कि वाइ डु वी डु द्याट बिकज माइग्रेसन इज अलमोस्ट लाइक अ ट्रेन द्याट्स रनिङ डाउन अ हिल यु कान्ट स्टप यु क्यान म्यानेज द्याट्स वाट यु निड टु डु र यसमा चाहिँ त्यो पपुलेसन डाइनामिक्स अब फेमिनाइजेसन अफ एग्रिकल्चर भने छौँ तर त्यसले हाउ मच अफ अ शिफ्ट हेज इट बिन ब्रट अन द एक्सटेन्सन सर्भिसमा अहिले पनि केही पनि खासै चेन्ज भएको छैन माइग्रेसनले अब रेमिटेन्सेस आइरहेछ भन्छ अब एग्रिकल्चर सेक्टर हो भने I'm also a student of agriculture. And मेरै agriculture कृषि क्षेत्रको कलिग्सहरूसँग कुरा गर्दाखेरि now we have used it as a blame. यो माइग्रेसनको कारणले गर्दा हाम्रो कृषिले पर्फर्मेन्स गरेन भन्थ्यो कि अनि साथीहरू भनौँ न 15-20 वर्ष अगाडि हामी भन्थ्यौँ सबैजना कृषिमा डिपेन्डेन्ट भएकोले हाम्रो कृषि चाहिँ प्रगति गर्न सकेन भन्छ। अहिले अब कृषि छोडेर गयो त्यसै कारण कृषिमा प्रगति हुन सकेन। वाट इज द प्रब्लम भन्दाखेरि it's not because of migration that land is being left fallow. अनि यसमा चाहिँ I had actually done a study. हामीले लमजुङ, चितवन र नुवाकोट चितवनमा त पनि माइग्रेसन व्यापक छ, ल्यान्ड फ्यालो छैन त, nowhere. That we did it. We used a mixed method to really see it. अनि हेर्दाखेरि त्यहाँ त ल्यान्ड फ्यालो छैन, माइग्रेसन छ भन्दाखेरि चितवनमा चाहिँ किन माइग्रेसनले ल्यान्ड फ्यालो हुँदैन, लमजुङ र नुवाकोटमा चाहिँ हुन्छ भन्दाखेरि it is the agriculture sector that is so commercially not viable. I'm an agriculture economist. अनि मेरो इकोनोमिक हात राख्ने भने म आफै गर्दिनँ कृषि। मेरो त्यो होलसेल जति स्लेस प्रोबेबली विल एक्सप्लेन इट बेटर, लेबर प्रोडक्टिभिटी जति त्यसमा युज हुन्छ र अब नाउ आइल ब्रिङ क्लाइमेट चेन्ज, त्यसले फेरि अर्को च्यालेन्ज राखिदिएको छ। इट हेज बिकम सच अ रिस्की भेन्चर द्याट इट डजन्ट मेक सेन्स टु इन्भेस्ट इन इट एनिमोर। र यो किन भयो भन्दा नट बिकज अफ माइग्रेसन, फर डिकेड्स वी हेभ एक्चुली नेग्लेक्टेड एग्रिकल्चर सेक्टरमा जुन इन्भेस्टमेन्ट हुनुपर्ने थियो त्यो भएको छैन, पर्टिकुलरली नि हिल एग्रिकल्चरमा। तराईमा जति पनि इम्प्रुभ भएको छ द्याट्स बिकज अफ टेक्नोलोजी द्याट वी हेभ इम्पोर्टेड फ्रम एल्सवेयर। हिलमा त्यो भएको छैन। अ लिटल टु डु विथ अगेन आई वुड से अल्सो ग्लोबल, बिकज ग्लोबली द होल फोकस फर रिड्युसिङ फुड सिक्युरिटी वाज अन 3-4 क्रप्स, मेज, विट, राइस त थियो, त्योभन्दा अरूमा त खासै इन्भेस्टै भएको छैन। एन्ड नन अफ दिज आर एक्चुली गुड फर हिल्स भन्दा हिलमा यो इन्भेस्ट भएकै छैन। एग्रिकल्चर हेज रिमेन स्ट्याग्नेन्ट, वाइ वुड पिपल स्टे? अनि एग्रिकल्चर भन्दा अरू कुनै अप्सन छँदै छैन। सो आई थिङ्क दिज आर द रिजन्स। एन्ड विकासमा हामी स्टिल पनि त्यसैमै फोकस छौँ। पिपल आर नट स्टेङ, युथ आज बिहानको सेसनमा पनि यो निस्केको छ, अब यङ मान्छे सबै बाहिर छन् रे, सो हाउ आर यु गोइङ टु रिच आउट टु देम? नो थट्स अन द्याट। अब सबै यहाँ बसेको बुढापाका महिलाहरू छ भने उहाँहरूलाई कसरी फोकस हुनु गर्ने हो यसमा? नो थट्स अन द्याट। जेन्डर हेज रिमेन्ड एज वान टिक बक्स काइन्ड अफ थिङ। I think this is where we have not actually managed to capitalize on migration benefits as much as it would have been possible. Probably Slash will disagree because he's saying that globally it has been it has been the same trend. It is globally, but I feel that there is a lot more that could have been capitalized.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think this statement you disagree, which is, I think there's little debate that there is immediate financial gains from migration, right? And just because of the wage gap between these countries. And most of the money migrants earn do come back to Nepal. Right? So, and there's also a growing body of work over the last 2-3 decades now that show that remittance directly improves consumption of households, which tends to be directly correlated with well-being and poverty, as well as some sort of investment, right? That has long-term implication for what does the migration mean in the long run for that household itself. But what I do find, at least in the context of Nepal and the way people discuss the impact of migration through remittance is, oh, are migrants spending money the right way or the wrong way, right? And I don't think that's a productive argument to have. Partly because it depends on preference. Like if I earn something, I have made many decisions that are probably not, I might regret. So, and so what I'm trying to say is, at least logically and conceptually thinking about what does remittance should be spent on is a very difficult and unanswerable question. If we go into the nitty-gritty detail of, oh, the migrants shouldn't be spending on wedding expenses, or migrants shouldn't be spending on shoes. But having said that, what economic theory does allow is for us to sort of identify two key challenges that migrant households do face in terms of when they decide and how they decide how to spend that money, right? And those two are, first of all, this idea that goes back to the temporary nature of migration. The increase in income of a migrant and a migrant household is temporary, right? So then the question becomes, how do I smooth out that increase in income across my lifetime of consumption, right? And we all face that. Like retirement is an example of that, right? We all know that at some point we stop working, our income sources end, but we want to consume even after we retire, and therefore we smooth out consumption. So in that context, migrants do face issues of making that decision, right? And that investing on future consumption is basically savings, right? So the question then becomes, do migrants and migrants' households have the right financial literacy and access to financial instruments through banks that allows them to invest and save money so that they can smooth consumption according to their preference, right? And again, some people have high discount rates, some people have low discount rates. So it's difficult to say what is the correct, appropriate amount to save. But what we do need to make sure that given a migrant faces that decision, they have the right instrument and access to banking sector for them to allocate their preferred amount of saving, right? And not overconsume just because there's no access to saving. And along that path, there are a lot of intervention studies that sort of focuses on, all this family migrant financial training programs sort of fall under that umbrella, expanding banking access, or developing certain kind of saving products and instruments by bank targeted towards migrant households. But there are also other ones which are sort of more niche, which is, we all like to save, but we save less because we are indisciplined, right? So there's this thing about time inconsistent preferences. So there are studies that specifically target migrant households where you commit at the time of earning that you're going to save a certain amount, right? And you have to incentivize them by topping it off, just like our employer does on retirement. So there are these stuff, but the general evidence from that, the one I'm very familiar with is on El Salvadorian migrants in DC. So they were offered a banking instrument where you commit certain amount to education of the kid, and the intervention tops it off, like doubles it or something like that. But generally, the result is the take-up rate of those instruments in that context were fairly low, which means that they were optimally investing in children's education, and they didn't have the constraint of not being able to save properly, right, in that context. But doesn't mean that doesn't exist in Nepal, that problem. Right? And one thing you do see in all data is remittance typically tends to increase. You mentioned education, and education is an example of investment for future consumption. So what you are doing is basically investing on your kid that improves the kid's future income. And as long as the kid is part of the household and there's a joint household decision making, that's basically retirement. Right? The other aspect, I think, where a meaningful discussion can be had from economic fundamentals is this idea of a transnational household. And what I mean by that is the income earner and the location of the source of the income is different from the person or the household that spends that money, right? And which is not typical in many household contexts, right? Usually the income earner and the expenditure of that income is physically there, so each other can check and balance each other. So in this context, there are a lot of inefficiencies in terms of how the household decides to spend that money arises due to asymmetric information, right? So the migrant does not necessarily have control or the ability to observe how the money is being spent by the household member once I send that money. That leads to often migrant making suboptimal decisions on how and the frequency and the amount of money he or she spends, as well as sends back home and saves, right? So in that problem setting, there are research where, again, in partnership with different banks, develop financial instruments for migrant workers, where it provides more visibility, even after they send money back home, of how the household is spending that money, right? As well as control over stopping household from spending additional money if the migrant disagrees with the outflow of money from the bank account. And you do see effects on that. And I just want to say, lastly, the biggest one where you do see effects are the cost of remittances, which is perhaps not that relevant in today, but 10 years ago, it was the main area of work, where the cost of remittance was too high, and just providing subsidies tends to not only increase the frequency of remittance money that comes in, but just the overall money that basically comes to the destination, sending country, and not migrants spending money there, quote unquote, frivolously.
Can I just add one last point? I think what I find a bit disturbing, अहिलेदेखिको अलिकति ट्रेन्डमा चाहिँ, and where we need to be very cautious that that doesn't happen, is that passing on that baton to the next generation and getting trapped into this low-skilled, low earning wages based remittances. I was just back from Sindapalchok and I was just asking them, यत्रो वर्ष विदेशमा बस्यो, काम गर्यो, पैसा आयो, सो केही त गर्नु भयो होला, काहीँ त इन्भेस्टमेन्ट, अनि द्याट्स अ के भन्छ सुखा क्षेत्र पानी नभएको कारणले, अब त्यसमाथि फेरि आई डोन्ट नो फ्रम वेयर दिस बाँदरको एकदमै ठुलो समस्या हैन. अनि उहाँले के भन्नु भन्दाखेरि अब हुन्छ अलिअलि भएको गर्छौँ तर आधा बाँदरले सकाइदिन्छ, कहिले पानी नै हुँदैन सबै गर्नलाई, दुईटा क्रप पनि वी कान्ट ग्रो. एन्ड देन दे शेयर द्याट अब 12 वर्षपछि what are you going to do भन्दाखेरि अब मेरो बच्चा 12 कक्षा पढ्दैछ, now he would go next. And almost the same destinations. अब बुवाको migration cycle सक्यो, अब छोरा is going. That is no graduation. And this is something that I think we need to be very cautious that it does not happen, that this dependency on low-skilled migration does not pass on from one generation to another. That we should be absolutely cautious about.
Yeah, thank you, Aminaziz Lessi, and we are almost over time of 45 minutes. I know that migration is such a multifaceted, multidimensional thing that we have so many topics to cover, but now I would like to open the floor for question and answers and conversations. We'll take 2 to 3 questions at a time, and then we'll move. Yeah, we have one here.
Namaste. My name is Sandis. I am a writer. Thank you for this thoughtful conversation. My question is, since you all three of you are working on migration, my question is, how has migration impacted social relation? I know we have talked in terms of economy and remittance and education, but I'm more wondering about how it has impacted, like, say, marital relation, and we see all these के अरे अलिकति दक्षिणपन्थी खालको या अलिकति कन्जर्भेटिभ पेट्रियार्कल फोर्सले पनि भन्ने पनि त्यो नेगेटिभ पोर्ट्रियल पनि आएको छ, तर देयर इज लाइक सम obviously some like positive sides. So I'm wondering about how, say, marital relationship or old age care or even things like caste has been impacted by migration नेपालको कन्टेक्स्टमा, र बाहिरको कन्टेक्स्टमा चाहिँ is how has migration or an influx of migrants impacted the social relations, say, in a place like, say, like the US, where मैले थाहा पाएको डेटामा चाहिँ 2040 हो कि 50 मा चाहिँ there's going to be a majority non-white population in the US भन्ने खालको I think I've read somewhere. So I'm just wondering about, like, how त्यस्तो खालको impact चाहिँ कस्तो हुन्छ, and how do you go about studying these kind of relations from like a very like research perspective?
Sure. Should I start?
No, let's take a few more questions, then we can I think we had one on the second row, no? Yeah, please, you kiss your. Yeah, please go on.
धन्यवाद. यो ओभरअल डिस्कसन एकदमै शिक्षाप्रद छ हैन, जानकारमूलक. तर ओभरअल यो संवादको कोर्स चाहिँ कता गइरहेको छ भने जस्तो लाग्यो मलाई भने माइग्रेसन इनइभिटेबल हो, तर ठिकै छ, यसमा चाहिँ यो अब अहिले रिमिटेन्स पनि ल्याइरहेछ, त्यसैले देश चलिरहेको छ भन्ने त्यो लुक्रेटिभ पार्ट मात्रै अलिकति बढी फोकस भइरहेको जस्तो लाग्यो हैन. त्यो भएर अघि साथीले पनि भनिहाल्नु भयो यसको सोसियल कुराहरू हैन. हामीले यो गिभ एन्ड टेक त दुइटै छ, म्युचुअल छ हैन. हामीले इम्पोर्टिङ लट अफ अब स्किलदेखि लिएर टाइमको भ्यालुहरू ल्याइराखेको छ, तर अरू अरू होइन कुराहरू पनि आइराखेको छ, त्यसलाई पनि कन्सिडर गर्नुपर्ने कुराहरू होइन। त्यस्तै गरेर अब यो फोर्स माइग्रेसन, नेपालको चाहिँ केसमा फोर्स माइग्रेसन हो भन्ने कुरामा अब दुई मत छैन क्या होइन। एभ्रिडे यो पेनको कुराहरूदेखि लिएर हरेक न्युज त्यसैको कभरदेखि लिएर फोर्स माइग्रेसनै हो, वी सुड एक्सेप्ट इट है मेजोरिटी। अनि त्यस पछाडि अब गभर्मेन्टले पनि जहिले पनि नयाँ देशमा रेभेन्यू के अरे एभेन्यू खोल्यौँ भनेर नै गौरव गरिराखेको हुन्छ क्या। त्यस कारण त्यो पार्टलाई मात्रै बढी हाइलाइट चाहिँ गर्नुहुन्न भन्ने नै पक्षमा छौँ होइन। जस्तो एउटा अमिनाजीले भन्नुभयो नि, तपाईँको एउटा ग्रेजुएट डेभलप गर्नलाई एग्रिकल्चरमा नेपालको इन्भेस्टमेन्ट, गभर्मेन्टको इन्भेस्टमेन्ट कति छ हजुरहरूले त्यो गर्नुभएकै छ नि त होइन। अनि जब कि तपाईँको त्यो ग्रेजुएट होइन, त्यो एउटा शिक्षित अब बल्ल प्रोडक्टिभ एज सुरु भयो भनेपछि बाहिर जाने कुरा छ नि, त्यो चाहिँ अब गल्फ मात्र होइन अरू विभिन्न देशमा। त्यसरी र उनीहरूले चाहिँ यदि यो फरेन के अरे यो बाहिर जाने पोलिसीमा अलिकति लेभरेज हुने हो भने त हामी त सायद होइन धेरै गाह्रो हुन्छ होला है। त्यस कारण माइग्रेसनको बहसमा चाहिँ इम्प्लोइमेन्ट अपर्च्युनिटीको कुरामा धेरै बहस गरौँ जस्तो लाग्छ मलाई। त्यो पार्टमा चाहिँ एकदमै कम भयो भन्ने मेरो चाहिँ जिज्ञासा राख्न चाहन्छु। हस्, धन्यवाद।
We have one.
Thank you. That was a very interesting discussion, a lot of knowledge out there. My name is Sabita. I'm from British Embassy in Kathmandu. It's actually not a question, but I'm needing a question from you. Basically, you in your conversation, you touched on a lot of areas about economy and remittance, linking that with migration. For me, I'm just interested in getting one question from each of you, all three of you. If I get one question from three of you, that would be wonderful. In this area, for me to go back and explore answer to this question, so that I can add value to this area of work. So not an answer as such, but if you can give me one question, because you raised a lot of questions. Just one question, if limited by resources, that I would want to answer in this area, what that would add value to this sector, that would really be very, very useful to me. Thank you.
Yeah. I think we can start
here.
Yeah.
Related to the first question, I mean, this is very niche, so you guys should step in after a bit. So one of my current work in Nepal is looking on returned migrants and how migration experience itself forms group identity that sort of overlaps and counteracts ethnic identity, right? So this is, again, a lab experiment where you prime people on different identities, but what you do end up finding are when you pit two people who are of different ethnic group identity against each other, right? On different types of games where you can measure different parameters of what it means to interact with people built on behavioral economic theory of altruism, cooperation, trust, beliefs, and things like that, you do see, in the status quo, a lot of ethnic in-group bias in terms of all these social preferences, right? So you are more altruistic towards your own group, you are ethnic group, you are more cooperative, you are more trustworthy, your beliefs are stronger, and so on. But when you prime them on migration and make their migrant identity, which may or may not exist, right? But when you prime them, all ethnic biases sort of disappears. So in that context, what that shows is as this phenomena occurs, in the long run, it's also fundamentally changing group identities of people and how they view each other or against each other. So which could have long-term implication in terms of how people vote, how people coordinate at the ward level, municipal level. And it's not always positive in the context that, you do see formation of a lot of returning migrant associations. So competition for resources. Again, that's a very sort of niche point, but it's related to what I'm studying right now, so I just wanted to answer. But
Is it working? Now, yeah. यो माइग्रेसन त्यसै कारण यति डिबेट हुन्छ कि किन भन्दाखेरि तपाईले how are you, which lens you are using? अब marital relationship को कुराहरू आयो हैन. So one thing that personally I completely disagree, and this is where I feel, I hope nobody from media is there, or good if they are there. I have piped a lot when it comes to particularly women migration को कुरालाई लिएर या left behind spouses को कुराहरू लिएर र यो जति पनि rhetoric, because there is rhetoric and then there is evidence. त्यो हेर्ने हो भनेदेखि I don't think that there is actually. अब हैन divorce हुनै हुँदैन भन्ने मान्नुहुन्छ भनेदेखि yes. अब let me just give you an example. एउटा यो publish भएको थियो यो social cost of migration भनेर. अनि एउटा स्टोरी के थियो भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ श्रीमान साउदी अरेबियामा थियो and अब वाइफले चाहिँ छोडेर अर्कोसँग बिहा गर्यो भनेर है. Then I started to probe what happened यो. अनि जसले लेख्नु भएको उहाँलाई नै सोधेँ. So apparently श्रीमान पहिला गयो श्रीमान श्रीमती मिलेर like it was a joint decision. अनि फर्केपछि वाइफले चाहिँ के भन्यो भने त हैन यसो नगरौँ. जे जसो छ यहाँ सँगै मिलेरै गरौँ. Don't go. It's been 4 years. Now don't go. Let's stop. We do something here. अनि श्रीमानलाई चाहिँ लाग्यो हैन I want to go back and he went. अनि वाइफले के सोच्यो भन्दाखेरि you know what, I want a present husband who is happy with working together for whatever life that we can have than an absent husband because I'm done with it. अब तपाई श्रीमतीको पर्सपेक्टिभबाट हेर्ने हो भने it's her choice. Empowerment देख्नुहुन्छ त्यसमा. होइन तपाईले अब यो डिभोर्स कुनै हालतमा हुँदैन डिभोर्स हाम्रो कल्चरमै छैन भन्ने सोच्यो भने this leads to that's what is often portrayed in the media. So it's up to you. मलाई लाग्यो that is super. I was like very happy. Okay, that's your choice. You actually अब वाइफको पर्सपेक्टिभबाट हेर्दाखेरि I was happy with that. Because she did tell him, don't go, let's stay here. भन्दा पनि मानेन. So, and I still remember this तराईमा भएको एउटा सानो वर्कसप in my earlier work. यही कुरा भएको चाहिँ एकदमै ठुलो सोशल कस्ट अफ माइग्रेसन धेरै भयो हाम्रोमा यस्तो भयो उस्तो भयो एकदम ठुलो डिस्कसन भयो. अनि त्यसपछि I remember somebody saying that these are all because migrationly that space has been given to women and that change is happening. All of us we say that change is one thing that's given. तर हामी मात्रै कसैलाई पनि खास चेन्ज चाहिँ मन पर्दैन रहेछ कि. We want status quo because change is very uncomfortable. So I think it has a lot to do with these. मेरो आफ्नै it's old, but मेरो आफ्नो रिसर्चले के भन्छ भन्दाखेरि when migration is successful, remittance आएको छ भने that has made women's life easier. बच्चा बच्चीको जुन टाइम काममा हुन्छ नि त्यो चाइल्ड लेबरमा that has been reduced. Womenको पनि लेजरमा अलिकति बढेको छ, which is good for well-being perspective बाट हेर्ने हो भने. So there are a lot of factors to consider and often problem के हुन्छ भन्दाखेरि एउटा केस दुईटा केसलाई त्यसलाई हाइप गरेपछि then you have a issue. So where is there actually concrete evidence to suggest about that social cost that we keep talking about? What I completely agree with you, I'm sorry I didn't get your name, and this is something that I have identified as a research gap. Gulf countries मलेसियामा हो अहिलेलाई लेबर लस भएको छ तर फर्किन्छन् के गिभन. अनि त्यही कारण चाहिँ म के भन्छु भन्दाखेरि सेफ हुनु पर्यो. दुईटा खुट्टामा गएको मान्छे दुईटा खुट्टामै आउनु पर्यो, पैसा कमाएर आउनु पर्यो, अलिकति एक्सपिरियन्स पनि लिएर आउनु पर्यो. एन्ड दिस वाज बिकज मेरो पहिलाको प्रोजेक्टमा द फर्स्ट थिङ द्याट everybody wanted to do was kill that project because it was on migration. And this is exactly what I mentioned. किन भन्दा यो रोक्न सक्दैन, मान्छे गएको गई छ. How do you keep them safe is what you need to really look into. That is not a concern. अब तपाईले जुन second issue बनाउनु भयो जुन more skilled people going away or student migration, which we are not discussing today, that is a different ball game. And there we really need to seriously think. You return to investment. I know it's very cold to speak about it, but that is genuine. That through invest एउटा पेरेन्टको होस् या देशकै होस्, it's a lot of investment. So what does it mean? तर हैन स्किल माइग्रेन्ट गरेर next 5-6 years मा फर्किन्छ भनेदेखि त there is no loss if you have remittances and then more skill भएर फर्किन्छ भनेदेखि that also has gain. Now having said that, I'm not saying by any means that there are no issues in migration. तर there are a lot needs to be done. But somehow I'm slightly reluctant to focus too much because that's where a lot of media attention goes. Probably, I think we were a little bit strategic, probably also looking into a more optimistic, positive approach to it. That the negative, the divorce between migration and development, this is where we are paying a lot of that cost. And secondly, maybe what I need to also add is, migrants, but यति धेरै expectation, why? तपाईले भन्नुभयो यो compulsion छ, element of compulsion छँदैछ कि मान्छे किन गइरहेको छ भन्दाखेरि things are not working. त्यो enabling environment यहाँ बसेर के गर्नलाई भएको छैन. त्यो enabling environment migrantले दिदैन कि that individual cannot. त्यसमा त system को कुरा आइरहेछ. तर migrationले त्यो systemलाई चाहिँ रोकेको थिएन के. कहाँबाट रोकेको छ त हाम्रो यहाँ economic growth र developmentमा राख्नलाई. भएभरको पैसा त हामी खाली रोडैमा राखेका छौं. And then like people are using that road to go away because they feel that that's the best use of that resources and they're doing it. To a large extent, we as like people here who are working on these development sectors, government, I think it's a lot of our failure than anything else. Did we respond to all the questions?
Yeah, we have one question from each of us about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to go first?
I do want to address the gentleman's comment. I do acknowledge there are costs. And there's cost not just to the sending country, but there is also cost to the receiving country as well. But I do want to emphasize also this point that what I'm saying is perhaps the overall benefit from it outweighs the cost, but that doesn't mean there are subgroups within that system that do lose out, right? And in a very simple example with a very simple labor market framework is perhaps the domestic employers in Nepal do lose out because wages are rising because, it's basically equalization of wages. You have labor abundance here with a lot of surplus labor, so you can hire cheap, but because they have access to higher wage opportunities, you have to sort of match to keep your labor in here, right? Doesn't mean that increase in wage is coming from increase in productivity. Labor is the same. So in both countries, there is cost, and there's always redistribution that occurs with these economic changes. But despite the redistribution, the net benefit is still positive, is I think the point that I would like to sort of emphasize. And just quickly coming back to the brain drain idea, it is true that you do lose investments, right? And besides the fact that let's say there is temporary work and they come back, even in permanent migration, research have shown that it also incentivizes people to invest because they think they can go abroad, right? And one of my very early work is with brain drain versus brain gain idea, which is looking at, let's say, changes in Gurkha recruitments, and you see that all eligible sort of kids in these villages that scatter who have aspirant of joining the UK labor market bump up their education, right, to meet that criteria. But obviously the recruitment numbers are so low, not everyone who responds do end up joining the British Army. But the thing about that is even those who are left behind, you think they made the wrong choice, right? Because they invested but could not even go abroad. There is positive returns to that investment even in the domestic labor market, even though that investment was originally made to go abroad, right? And this sort of pattern you can see everywhere. So there's a recent work that came out of Philippines that sends a lot of nurses. So for every nurse Philippines sends out, it generates 7 additional nurses who does not go out, but invest in nursing and stays in Philippines, right? So yes, I do agree there is this sense of, there's a public money that goes into investing in public education and they sort of go abroad. But it also generates more aspirant workers to sort of invest in that to begin with, and the second one often sort of beats out the first. In many contexts, there are countries where net brain drain is higher, but I don't know what's the general trend in Nepal, but in this very specific example of Gurkha recruitment, it is true that despite the fact that people are getting education to go abroad, you end up with a lot more higher education in Nepal who don't go because precisely of that.
I think the last question, if I have to put one question, then, and that's a question that I ask myself as well, and something that I would be working in next couple of years, is how do you bring these two together, development and migration narrative, get away from all this negativity and start to look into how can we turn this into a positive. I think that is going to be critically important. And look into, and now I'm not saying that you completely ignore the social cost or other negative part of it. Look into that as well. How do we reduce that? How do you maximize benefit? And that you can do only when you start to, literally accept the grounded reality and then look into our development thoughts and development plans. And I really like what he just mentioned about, in reducing precarity, they say three things are important. Recognition, redistribution, and representation. And this, you can reduce this overall precarity only if you start to recognize that this is a grounded reality. This is something that households are doing for centuries, not only decades. So can we recognize that fact? Can we now start looking into how do we make best use of the things that the families think are best for them to make it best for the country as well? And then start redistributing our development efforts and investments accordingly. I think that would be the question that I ask myself, as well as something that I would definitely ask you as well.
Oh, question. If I had to pick one, I think, again, not going back to this theme of return migration, but I think there's a lot of unanswered questions on reassimilation of return migrants. And specifically, if you look at the Labor Force Survey 2017, the latest one, if you compare similar worker who hasn't gone abroad versus some similar worker who went abroad and come back, the labor market outcome for the latter is significantly worse. They participate a lot less in the labor market. Even when they do, they are not necessarily working on the field they were trained on, and therefore their wages are also low. So, and if you look at purely labor force participation rate among return migrants, it's appalling. It's quite high, like above 50% are not participating immediately. And the question is it preference, is it labor trade-off, or are they having problem reintegrating, right? And I think that sort of area, especially in Nepal, is very less understood. And I think it's a pertinent, if not the most important question to ask, given most of them are fairly young with a lot of labor time to spend in Nepal.
Sadhik, you were also asked this question.
Yes, I was just thinking about the discussion we had previously, and I think that's also something that needs to be looked into is immobility. We have been talking a lot about mobility, what drives migration, but we do not look at the immobile population, like those who do not migrate. So are these people not migrating because they do not want to, or they do not have the aspiration to migrate, or are they not migrating because of some kind of constraints or challenges? And what kind of implication these immobile population, like those who do not migrate, have on the socio-economic and political aspects of the country? So I think, in short, I will say that this immobility is something that needs to be researched in Nepal. Yeah, so now, yes. Please.
So on the migration, I just wanted to give two comments. I'm Anupu Priti, I'm a lawyer. So one is, I think on a bad side, Lakshmi Prasad Devkota wrote Muna Madan, and I think that story is still true in various forms, and that really fascinates me, that stories, and whatever we see around, that's really true, and the context is relevant. And I think on a really positive side, what I wanted to add was this experience I recently had discussing with one of the cab driver. So he'd worked 11 years in Israel, and he's come back. He spent 40 lakhs about buying EV taxi, and he was driving. He's kind of now here, coming back, getting into different kind of a workforce, like you guys have discussed, and he seems very happy to be in Nepal, and he feels whatever 11 years his work there has paid off. And the context is, I think, whatever we think about the savings and right investment, looks like he's done everything right. He sent one daughter to Canada. One of his daughter is in class 10. He's waiting for her to graduate class 12, and he wants to send her to Canada as well. And he wants to go to, I think, Sindhu Palchak, where his home is, and do some of more modern agriculture. He has 20 ropanis of land. He wants to lease around, and he wants to do, be an entrepreneur from that context. So I see, like, I think there are a lot of, good stories around migration also, and I think that kind of story also kind of makes all of us happy. So just wanted to say that. Thank you.
नमस्ते म विदुर भुषाल बिरकमा काम गर्छु म पनि इमिग्रेन्ट वर्कर हो भन्नु पऱ्यो है यति बेरसम्म हामीले धेरै कुरा डिस्कस गऱ्यौँ होइन हिजो मात्र एउटा न्युज आइरहेको थियो कि 58 वर्षको मान्छे चाहिँ सिम्पल झोला बोकेर एयरपोर्टमा बाहिर जान लाइन लाग्नु भएको थियो अहिलेसम्म हामीले धेरै कुरा गऱ्यौँ सरले कुरा गर्नुभएको फोर्स्ट माइग्रेसनको बारेमा म चाहिँ कुरा गर्न चाहन्छु एक्ज्याक्टली हाम्रो टपिक डिस्कसनको टपिक चाहिँ खास गरी माइग्रेसनलाई धेरै कुराले सराउन्ड गर्छ होइन त्यो मध्ये अहिले सबैभन्दा बढी कम्पेलिङ इस्यु चाहिँ के हो भने हाम्रो अनएजुकेटेड ब्याकवर्ड सोसाइटीबाट मान्छेहरू फोर्स माइग्रेसनमा जान बाध्य छन् जुन अघि नै अलिकति कुरा उठाउनु भएको थियो सेफ माइग्रेसन भनेर यो 3D वर्क्स गर्नलाई नेपाली पठाइन्छ जसलाई चाहिँ बेसी केही पनि थाहा हुँदैन होइन त्यो भनेको हाम्रो स्टेटको फेलियर एजुकेसन सिस्टमदेखि लिएर सबै हो र अर्को कुरा चाहिँ फर्किसकेपछि के भन्ने कुरा छ मान्छे अहिले सिलेसीले भन्नुभयो 2 to 4 इयर्स एभरेजमा छ भन्नुभयो तर मैले लास्टमा केही समयदेखि रेगुलरली इन्टरेक्ट गर्छु मान्छेहरूसँग धेरैको एभरेज टाइम चाहिँ मोर देन 15-16 इयर्स भइसक्यो अहिले त्यो ट्रेन्ड चाहिँ तपाईँले हेर्नुभयो भने वी हेभ फ्यु सक्सेस स्टोरिज बट वी सुडन्ट बी हेल्ड ब्याक बाई द्याट हामीले सोच्नुपर्ने चाहिँ जुन प्लानिङको कुरा गर्नुभएको छ मैले त्यहाँनिरबाट सोध्न चाहन्छु अब हामीले फ्युचरको लागि त प्लानिङ गर्नै पर्ने छ वी निड टु हेभ इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चर मेकानिजम अर एभ्रिथिङ इन प्लेस वेन our people will come back. If we will come back, if we go back again out of the country, होइन त्यतिखेरको लागि चाहिँ कसरी प्लान गर्दा ठिक होला के कुरामा चाहिँ फोकस गर्नु पर्ला किनभने राज्यले लगभग 10 वर्षदेखि चाहिँ विभिन्न बाहनामा विभिन्न नाममा खर्च चाहिँ गरे गरी छ देयर हेभ बिन डिफ्रेन्ट इनिसिएटिभ्स बट त्यसको आउटकम छैन तर कन्ट्रारी के भइरहेछ भने ट्रेन अहिले भर्खर अनुप सरले पनि भन्नुभयो पहिला इन्डिया गइरहेको थियो इन्डियाबाट गल्फ जाने भयो गल्फबाट अहिले यो के भन्छ क्रोएसिया साइप्रस पोर्चुगल पोल्यान्ड माल्टा चलिरहेछ होइन त्योभन्दा माथि अमेरिका क्यानाडा अस्ट्रेलिया चलिरहेछ तर यो सिरिज जाँदाखेरि चाहिँ हामीले अघि सुरुमा फर्स्ट सेसनमा चाहिँ हाउ टु युटिलाइज डेमोग्राफिक डिभिडेन्ड भन्ने कुरा गरेका थियौँ त्यो गर्नलाई चाहिँ कसरी कुन पाथ लिनु पर्ला भन्ने विषयमा तपाईँहरूको रिसर्चको आधारमा चाहिँ केही पोइन्ट्सहरू फ्यु 1-2 पोइन्ट्समा वाट वुड बी द ब्राइट एक्सन based on your experience?
We'll take few more questions and also Shreyaji, if there are any questions online, please let us know. We have one question from here, right? Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Anupama. Hi. I was a very insightful session. I enjoyed it very much. And I was hoping you'd shed some light on policy and labor rights and protection abroad. So I'm still hoping that you'd shed some light on those aspects. And also as a researcher, why is there a big gap on research regarding policy and protection rights? Again, because I see a lot of papers written on remittance, their growth, and how the household consumption has been, going on, or how it's being shaped, or overall household consumption, growth in household consumption. But why is there such a big gap? What are the threats or challenges that researchers are facing in terms of researching on policy and labor rights and protection abroad? And also the cost-country comparison, at least in terms of South Asia. Thank you. That's all.
Can you, we can
थ्याङ्क यू तपाईँले त्यो केस सेयर गर्नुभएकोमा यो हाम्रो माइग्रेसन पोलिसी हेर्नुभयो भने हाम्रो विकेस्ट चाहिँ रिटर्न रिइन्टिग्रेसनमै छ कि त्यसै कारण वी आर ह्याभिङ दिस डिस्कसन्स अनि यो माइग्रेसनलाई लार्जली नेगेटिभ कन्नोटेसन दिनुको एउटा मेन कारण यो पनि हो कि बिकज रिइन्टिग्रेसनमा खासै काम गर्ने सो स्ट्रक्चरल जुन प्रब्लम्सहरू छ मान्छे बाहिर जानलाई फर्केर आएर पनि त्यही स्ट्रक्चरल प्रब्लम्स छ कि अनि स्ट्रक्चरल प्रब्लम्समा इन्डिभिजुअल एजेन्सीले मात्रै खासै त्यति धेरै इम्प्याक्ट गर्न सकिन्न एन्ड आई थिङ्क द्याट्स वेयर यो रिइन्टिग्रेसन नहुनुमा चाहिँ यो अब हामी माइग्रेसन साइकल भन्छौँ माइग्रेसन साइकल पनि बढ्दै जानुको कारण पनि त्यही हो र जुन मैले अगाडि पनि भने जेनेरेसनमा पो यो जाने हो कि भन्ने एउटा डर पनि बस्न थालेको छ यो भएको छैन अब मलाई अब वाइ भन्दाखेरि अब when I decided to do my work on migration in 2002 त्यतिखेर त यो यति पनि थिएन के nobody had worked on remittances तपाईँ माइग्रेसन हेर्नुभयो भने युएसए मेक्सिको कोरिडोर हुन्थ्यो म्याक्सिमम लिटरेचर होइन एन्ड फ्यु अदर कोरिडोर्स हाम्रोतिर त भएकै थिएन यो कुरा आई वाज भेरी सरप्राइज यो माइग्रेसन आउँछ के चिज रहेछ मलाई आफैलाई थाहा थिएन सो यो होल माइग्रेसन रिसर्च इज नट द्याट ओल्ड नेपालको कन्टेक्समा जो प्रोलिफरेसन भएको छ लास्ट 2 डिकेड्समा अ लट अफ वर्क हेज बिन डन त्योभन्दा अगाडि एकदम लिमिटेड मात्रै थियो है आई थिङ्क द्याट्स वान अफ द रिजन्स अनि यो रिइन्टिग्रेसन अब कति 1980sमा हाम्रो फरेन इम्प्लोइमेन्ट एक्चुली सुरु भयो त्योभन्दा अगाडि भइ चाहिँ रहेको थियो इन्डिया क्रस बोर्डर त इट्स बिन गोइङ फर सेन्चुरिज तर अरू देशमा चाहिँ त्यतितिर मात्र सुरु भए पनि मेजर चङ्क गएको चाहिँ 2000 मिड 2000sतिरहरू मात्रै हो कि सो द होल इन्ट्रेस्ट इन दिस टपिक स्टार्टेड इन मिड 2000sतिर वेन लाइक सिग्निफिकेन्ट एकदमै भिजिबल देख्ने गरी र त्यो बेला चाहिँ सबै हाम्रो होलसोल फोकस म अन प्रोटेक्सनतिरै थियो अब बिस्तारै रिटर्निङमा चाहिँ रिइन्टिग्रेसनमा गर्नुपर्छ भन्ने चाहिँ एकदम धेरै आवाज नभएको चाहिँ होइन बट नाउ इट्स स्लोली गेटिङ इन्टु अनि एउटा अर्को चाहिँ फेरि माइग्रेसन भन्ने बित्तिकै रेमिटेन्स डोमिनेट भइदियो कि होल डिस्कोर्समा एन्ड द्याट्स वाइ अघि सोसियल कस्ट भने छ त्यो नभएको होइन बट वी डोन्ट ह्याभ क्लियर इभिडेन्स इन टर्म्स अफ हाउ हाई द्याट कस्ट इज एन्ड द्याट्स वाइ एम भेरी रिलक्टेन्ट टु स्पिक अन द्याट एस्पेक्ट्स कि त्यसमा अ लट अफ नन रिसर्च्ड एरियाजहरू छ यसमा चाहिँ माइग्रेसनमा पनि आई थिङ्क इट्स ट्रु इट इज ह्यापनिङ एन्ड रिसर्चर्स आर ट्राइङ टु क्याच अप अन इट कि यो इस्युजहरू एकदमै ब्लेटेन्ट भएपछि देन वी आर ट्राइङ टु क्याच अप ओके वाट निड्स टु बी डन भन्ने हिसाबले सो देयर इज नो क्वेसन द्याट निड्स एटेन्सन रिटर्न रिइन्टिग्रेसनमा चाहिँ कसरी गर्न सकिन्छ आई थिङ्क आफ्टर कोभिड जब कोभिडबाट धेरै मान्छे गयो त्यसपछि चाहिँ फरेन इम्प्लोइमेन्ट बोर्ड पनि अलिकति तात्तेर यसमा के गरौँ भन्ने हिसाबले लागेको छ इफ आई रिमेम्बर करेक्टली 2018 कि 19मा फर्स्ट टाइम नेपाल सरकारले पनि बजेट राखेको छ कि यो रिटर्न रिइन्टिग्रेसनको लागि भनेर सफ्ट लोन्स भनेर बिफोर द्याट देयर वाज नथिङ द होल फोकस वाज अन डेस्टिनेसन न्युअर डेस्टिनेसन्स अनि रेगुलेसन्स यिनीहरूमा बढी फोकस थियो राइट्समा काम नभएको होइन रिसर्च पनि भएको छ लट अफ आइ एम ह्याप्पी द्याट अ लट अफ थिङ्स हेभ एक्चुली हेभ इभल्भ राइट्समा द च्यालेन्ज इज ट्रान्सनेसनल हुँदाखेरि एउटा सोभन नेसनले अर्को सोभन नेसनमा गर्न सक्ने त्यो इन्फ्लुएन्स कम हुन्छ एन्ड दिस इज वाइ यु हेभ रिजनल बडिजहरू कोलम्बो प्रोसेस आबुधाबी डायलग्स आर सेटअप फर द्याट तर ग्राउन्डेड रियालिटी के छ भन्दाखेरि गरिब देशको अलिकति से पनि कमै हुने रहेछ कि यो प्रोटेक्सन यसमा तर नभएको चाहिँ होइन देयर आर प्लेटफर्म्स टु रेज दिस a lot of progress has happened, particularly यो big companiesहरूलाई चाहिँ यो प्रोटेक्सनमा धेरै काम गर्नलाई चाहिँ यो लास्ट 10-15 इयर्समा हेर्नु भने there has been, but still there are a lot of problems still that needs to be resolved.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I remember the exact questions. Do you have a?
Return reintegration चाहिँ किन भइरहेको छैन भनेको?
And also, like, are there any studies related to migration policies in Nepal?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of studies that look at impact of different policy interventions, right? And that goes from, again, like I said, from pre-departure to returnees, mostly lacking in the returnee side because it's just difficult to study. Because returnee includes not just what happened abroad, but understanding the domestic labor market itself, which is a different field. If I remember, you said something about how do you make it competitive in going forward, low skill versus skill. Because this is the end of the session, I do, and this is informal discussion, I do want to be a little hyperbole here. one of the reasons we are attractive to domestic foreign employers is because we are cheap. And reason we are cheap is because we are low skilled. That's our competitive advantage right now, right? So I do see a lot of narrative, oh, we need to upskill migrants, which is a noble cause. But we also have to think about, okay, I generate doctors, but is there a demand for doctors? Are we competitive in that field where their own natives are also willing to work, right? And there are a lot of doctors. So what I'm trying to say is the policy needs to be built in terms of the global context of what economic forces are driving Nepalese to go abroad, what kind of skills are in demand, and at present, is our policy in line with that so that we can supply those skills, whether it's low skill, semi-skill, high skill? That's just a nomenclature, right? I mean, low skill doesn't mean bad. It's just a category of skill. And it is true that a low-skill worker abroad in some contexts makes more than a high-skill worker here. Then the question is, what do we want, right? We want higher wages, regardless of the skill. We think that high skill brings more money, but that's not the case if we are not comparatively advantaged in the global market, in that labor market, right? So that's at present, but the fact still remains that if this changes, let's say some other country, especially a lot of African countries, joins this phenomena, are we still competitive in the low-skill market? And perhaps not, because they have more labor abundance than us, right? Then looking ahead, how do we change the skill composition of our workforce that might be different from what we are good at now in terms of what people want, versus what we can provide in the future, right? So that's where perhaps upskilling should come in. Not necessarily just that, oh, being a migrant worker as a nurse is better than being a migrant worker as a service sector. I mean, for me, that doesn't make that much sense if you purely think about in terms of economic returns, right, wages. The other question on right-based approach, I do agree there is a lot of underinvestment in research, partly because at least my subfield, my field of economics is not really geared towards understanding right-based approach. It's more about economic factors and labor market, right? So part of that reason, and part of the reason is what she mentioned, even from the policy perspective, if you want to do something about that, it requires multi-party coordination. Like a sending country cannot easily change rule in developed country, right? And what they are doing, and vice versa. But I think I briefly mentioned earlier, the field is going, at least economics field is going in migration towards the point where people discuss about the trade-off between equity and access, right? And the equity is driven by this right-based approach that we need to provide certain safe standard, at the extreme case, equal amount as the natives. But if you think about it, if you do that, and in many contexts they have done it, put like a wage floor for migrant workers, especially from Philippines, that makes them uncompetitive. So all that ends up doing, Nepal can set, migrants are coming out of Nepal at least needs to earn $1,000, right? Which perhaps is above the labor market wage, because otherwise that policy is non-binding anyway, it doesn't make sense. If you do that, then you lose the employer abroad is perhaps going to look for other destinations that don't have that rule. So there is that trade-off in that context. Even from the receiving country perspective, the only reason, not the only reason, one of the main reasons they're able to sell this to their native workers is precisely through restrictions imposed by temporary migration, right, and visas, that you are only allowed to work on certain sectors, you don't have as much right as the natives, so there's no competition. Even from the foreign employer's perspective, part of the reason we are cheap is because we don't have certain rights as natives, right? So it is a much more complex issue. Part of it is economics is not perfectly suitable to sort of evaluate that and understand that complexity as well. So there is that gap, I do.
Can I just add one more thing? I think probably just building on what Slace is saying, अर्को हाम्रो reality के छ भन्दाखेरि अहिलेसम्म त demographic dividend, we have a lot of people तर यो census हेर्ने हो भने fertility rate has dramatically reduced, which means to say we will not be having as many people available, in near future. And secondly, aspirations are changing. And if you're really thinking of, now again, I'm thinking of reintegration, also making it a real choice. Migration, this is where the focus would be, that it has to be a real choice. Choice like say रोक्नु हुँदैन भन्छु, because I have met people who wanted to go just because गाउँमा बसेर plane हेर्थ्यो, त्यो प्लेनमा मान्छे कसरी बस्छ भनेर only for that experience गएको पनि छन्. So that aspirations are so different. अनि young मान्छेको एउटा चिज चाहिँ लागेको newness, नयाँ चिजको चाहिँ एकदमै नयाँ चिजको experience गर्न त्यो newness को एकदम भोक हुन्छ है. And we are not affluent enough कि एक वर्ष break लिएर you go and see the world भन्ने पनि हुँदैन रहेछ. And often young people have used this as a platform to engage his or her own world vision भनौँ न त्यो हिसाबले पनि. So moving forward, two things to keep in mind again. Anticipatory, very important in migration. हाम्रो labor force will decline in the near future. अहिलेको trend हेर्दाखेरि the education skills, that's going to grow. Then we have to probably think of what are those, जसलाई चाहिँ migration as a choice लिन चाहन्छ भने, what are those destinations and sectors where we can go and then start to build. अनि यो एउटा चिज चाहिँ मैले पहिला पनि भन्थेँ, स्किल्समा यदि नेपालले इन्भेस्ट गर्ने हो भने we should probably identify skills that is reusable. फर्केर आउँदाखेरि पनि त्यो skill build गरेको चिज चाहिँ reuse हुने किसिमले. I think that's something we have to keep in mind as well. Lastly, political economy. It's not my strength, but I know few of the colleagues here are. The destination country मा पनि एउटा चिज मैले बुझेको चाहिँ when the कतारमा जाँदाखेरि why are you keeping Nepalese-हरु भने मैले त्यहाँको few companies-सँग पनि कुरा गरेँ, and they were like, destination countries, particularly in countries where migration is very high, they're very cautious about migrants. अनि उनीहरु चाहिँ they want to have a balance of different countries. त्यसै कारण and this is when I realized that actually government of Nepal can negotiate from a point of strength. किनभने हामीसँग यति धेरै मान्छे छँदै छैन कि त्यो बङ्गलादेश, इन्डिया र पाकिस्तानले जति पठाउन सक्छ हामी सक्दैनौँ. त्यो पोइन्टमा when I was still very much into it, 60 to 70% हो. त्योभन्दा बढी हामी डिमान्ड मिटै गर्न सक्दैन थियो, and that's why the Qatarबाट they simply didn't let people to come back. So that would be the that point of strength if you do a bit of that political economic analysis, because they want to have that mix. They don't want overwhelming people from one particular country. And this is where I think we'll have to also look into, because we are relatively a smaller country. So looking at our future population or labor force availability, the growing investment into education, त्यसले ल्याउने benefits, as I said, because we will never have that huge amount of people going out. So thinking more, negotiating more from a point of strength, what are those areas? And then simultaneously think, now we are talking about more skilled people. And I think today, just before this session, we are talking about what are those sectors where, people don't need to go out. Can we bring these jobs into the country? So maybe more internal migration, but that's fine. So more IT-based now. Mostly we are moving towards digital world. Can we think about more jobs in digital arena? Because the young people don't want to work in certain sectors. That's not going to work out. तपाईं हामी मध्ये म मेरो बच्चालाई कहिले पनि आशीर्वादै दिदैन कि तिमी किसान होस् भनेर. Why would I expect somebody else to do that to their children? त्यो पनि एउटा reality हो. So to education र skill matching खाले jobs, what are those sectors? Can we start investing where we don't need our people going out, but let the jobs come in? I think that would be very important to think as well.
Yeah. So I think we have come to the end of our session as well now. Thank you so much, Aminaji Slesi. It was really interesting conversation. So I think we have a coffee break now for 15 minutes. And we meet here at 3:30 for the next session, which will be hosted by Anup Upreti, and the session is on where rubber meets the road, the ground realities of doing business in Nepal. So see you in the next session. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.